go. There we go. That's better. Man, I hate it when it does that. That is absolutely the dumbest thing in the world. Well, it looks like we are back anyway. So let me see here. Let that get caught up. But looks like I got one of you back. Oh, anyway, we'll see if we can. We'll see what this will look like. So, uh, damn, I hate that. That kills everything. That kills all the momentum. Kills all the. Everybody's gonna come back. So, all right. I do not. They're pissed and twisted. Good to see you, brother. I'm glad you're here. I hate when it does that. For whatever, every time I set up a live stream, no matter how I orientate the phone when I set it up, it always reverts, or it has been reverting back to that or the vertical view instead of leaving me in the horizontal landscape stuff. So welcome back, Jimmy. I apologize for that. Like I say, it's not something I expect, but it just for whatever reason it happens. So anyway, I was a minute or two anyway, but I hate because it kind of kills the notification on a live stream. So let's see if that's a little better. Uh, yeah, I appreciate that, Mark. Yeah, sure, it's something I stopped in my DJ Smo action. I stopped using it for these live streams. Boreal on my internet still if for this kind of in asking about a live stream and what you guys wanted to talk about or discuss this week. And it certainly is relevant here in the Mid South right now, and for a lot of y'all in the country, is heat soak and curing problems with heat. So we'll talk about a bunch of little tips there, and then give you some new little things. But before we get started, I'm gonna stop and give you another one really quick that I didn't discover it. I knew it, but I want to make mention of something. Those are the latest Edelbrock carburetor books. Now this is the newest one right here on the right. This one's a little bit older one. Edelbrock only did this one for about maybe 2 or 3 years, and it's kind of a weird one. It's the same as it normally is. It's got all the little setup tips and all that. But for whatever reason, they left out all the tuning charts. It goes into the Spanish side. I don't know what they were thinking. But if you have this white Edelbrock Carburetor book, throw it away. Just get rid of it. The newer one, anyway, at least has the tuning chart stuff in, which we've talked about quite a bit. You need that. But there's a problem with this one, too. For whatever reason, I think Edelbrock must have printed these before they came out with the AVS2 carburetor. So none of the AVS2, the 500, the 650, and the 800 are not in here. You have to go online, and you can go to the carburetor landing page for it, and you can print off the calibration charts. So just one little thing that somebody had asked me earlier in the week, because I told them, just use your carburetor book. It's got it in there. They're like, you're crazy. It doesn't have a tuning chart in there. And I said, well, send me a picture of the cover or something. And he sent me this one. I was like, yeah, I forgot about that. So just want to make mention of that. When I talk about using the tuning book that's in the with the carburetors. Get the if it's the newer one with that cover on it, you're good. If it's this white one, huck it. The older ones, I think, I don't remember what was on it, but same type of deal. It was a darker type of image on there. But if you've got the white one, just throw that thing away. So anyway, I can't remember that guy's name, but if you're watching, I told you you weren't crazy. You're right. It's not in there. You have to have a new one. Here's another cool tip. If you call Edelbrock's customer service line, that is staffed here in Memphis, Tennessee, and you are missing this book, and you tell them, can you send me one of these in the mail? They will drop one in the mail to you. They'll drop the little DVD that comes in there. Not nearly as important, but this book is gold. So kind of a cool deal. Their customer service has always been top notch. So any of those girls on the tech or on the customer service line, if you need one of these, just call them. They'll take good care of you. So anyway, little tip there. Let's see here. Welcome, Bubba. I'm glad to have you here. So anyway, just wanted to cover a little bit of that really quick. I guess before we get too far down the road here, since we're a couple minutes in and YouTube won't penalize me for it, I can talk about beer. It's a Pacifico night tonight. So cheers to all y'all. I appreciate you making it on. Oh, that's good. It's been a long week. It's been a long day. So, what else I want to talk about? I think let's just jump right into the heat soak side of things. It's been in the 90s here. The last couple of days it's been a little nicer, but it's still hot. Pretty heavy humidity, and I'm sure a lot of places around the country, and even my good friends up in Canada are seeing the same thing. Hopefully the Piston Twisted guys are getting some good, nice, warm weather up there and making y'all happy. But that hot weather is when things start to go haywire, because depending on what type of maintenance you've done on your carburetor, it may not be ready for it. So we're going to talk about some things to kind of help that. But what causes those problems? What causes... A lot of times people will call it vapor lock, and I guess probably vapor lock is still a thing, but most aftermarket stuff, I don't think you run into that near as much as you did in the, like the late 70s, 80s, early 90s, before, fuel injection stuff really took over. Vapor lock was more of the components got hot within the system. The fuel pump got hot. The fuel lines would get too warm or hot. The return line would get plugged up or something, and it would cause a restriction in the system and cause everything to overheat. Well, once all of the components in the system got hot, that's when you ran into more of the vapor lock type stuff. Still occurred in the carburetor, but typically the carburetor will boil the fuel over into the engine and you lose all that. But all those things are certainly very important to take into consideration. Fuel pump, return line, driving and stop and go type of traffic is always good. A crappy fuel that we have today, certainly all those things. Fuel filters, any restriction in the system that would cause things to not operate normal, especially if it's an electric fuel pump. They typically don't like that situation. So anyway, that's typically the reason why. Now on the aftermarket stuff, which I think most of y'all are dealing with, aftermarket intake manifolds, aftermarket carburetor, whether it's Edelbrock Holly, it doesn't really matter the flavor of the carburetor, they're still going to attract heat the same way. And if you saw the video I did a week or 2 ago, 2 weeks ago maybe, I don't remember, time's kind of falling all together here. But I did a video on blocking off the heat crossover in the intake manifold. That's another really good tip to keep the heat out of the manifold. Now, sometimes it'll make it a little cold-blooded, I guess maybe is the right way to put it, where it's a little, hesitant, a little rich, a little stumbly, whatever, but that only lasts for a minute or two, and then you got good heat in the engine, and that tends to go away pretty quickly. But blocking off those passages certainly works. Ethanol. We've talked about ethanol 100 times on this channel. ethanol for sure is one of the major problems with, with fuel these days. At sea level, I had to relook it back up because I know when you go down in elevation, the closer you get to sea level, the lower the boiling point of ethanol, and I believe it's about 175 degrees. Now, if you all look at the temp gauge in the vehicle you're working on, how often does your engine get above 175? All the time. So, most of the time you're operating 180, 190 maybe, if it's a more of a factory type setup. I mean, heck, the GM like those things to run at like 200 because it, burned more of the fuel and air going in. So, 200, you're going to cook the ethanol in that fuel system pretty aggressively if you don't do some things. So that's what we want to talk about today is just some of those little tips and tricks. The big one, which we've obviously talked about 100 times, is a spacer. Now, this is a black phenolic plastic is what they typically call it, but really it's just a hard plastic. I'm sure most of y'all have seen these before. The thicker you can run one of these, the better, because the more you isolate from the heat of the intake manifold and keep it away from the carburetor, the better off you'll be. It's keeping the heat away. Now, I was going to try to dig up, and maybe I'll throw a picture of it. I know it's around here somewhere. I'll throw a picture up in the community tab of an old Holley carburetor heat shield that would go underneath it. It was just a piece of aluminum, but I have a really cool one that was made by GM. And I know when I bought it, it was like 85, 86 when I had a little small block powered drag car. It was a little Vega. And I bought it to try to keep the heat off the Holley, because even back then with completely leaded fuel, no ethanol or alcohol in it at all, you still got heat problems with the carburetor. So anyway, the spacer's a huge one. So, run the thickest one you can. I run a wood laminate one on the truck, and the Chevelle will get one too now that I'm going big block and carburetor. The wood is a really good heat block. The natural materials typically always are better. Michelin for a good example, Michelin uses more natural rubber in their tires because it wears better. Why is Michelin tires so much more money than everything else? Because they don't use a lot of synthetics in it, and growing rubber trees in Indonesia is very expensive. So more natural rubber, the tire wears longer. Typically the natural type stuff does better, it seems like, anyway. I don't know if that's a general rule of thumb or just me, taking two things and saying, well, it all must be that way. But anyway, I use a wood laminate because it feels, I don't have any empirical evidence to share with you, but it feels like it runs a little cooler. So anyway, Robert, Michigan in the house. You're melting up there. Well, I kind of figured you were getting a little warm up there, and certainly for our good old Canadian brothers up there, I'm sure it's the warm weather is certainly, I'm sure it's welcome, but I'm sure it's also a little difficult to get used to. One thing that we haven't talked about, and I dug this out, and I knew I had some of it laying around, but I think this was made by DEI. But you can buy this. It's a covering. I think this is 1/2 inch, maybe, is the size. But it just slides over your fuel line. Now you can slide it over brake line if you want, but fuel is certainly better. And what it's designed to do is isolate it from the heat source and run that from your fuel line from the tank all the way to the front. Now I think 1/2 inch would probably fit over a 5/16, no problem. It may fit over 3/8. With the fitting through there, I don't know. But I forgot I had this. I bought this quite a long time ago, actually. And I found it the other day when I was digging through some other crap, looking for things that I've lost. And figured we'd talk about it. Another really good way to do it, if you can isolate the heat from getting to the fuel line, you send cooler fuel, obviously, up to the carburetor. So that's another really good idea when it comes to trying to isolate the heat from the carburetor. So, what else? Well, let me pop in here. Yeah, old school heat wrap over the headers, another really good one from Piston Twisted there. Absolutely. If you can isolate the heat from headers and keep it contained, absolutely. It keeps the underhood temperature down, which certainly helps the carburetor out quite a bit, but it helps from soaking everything else with heat around it, whether it's a mechanical fuel pump, whether it's your fuel lines, you know, trying to keep it as cool as possible. Really, really, really good tip. Sometimes you'll get guys that'll bark a little bit about that and say, well, you know, if you wrap your headers, you're eventually going to destroy them. I don't disagree with that if you're driving in situations where you get a lot of moisture under hood, but typically if you're running the engine long enough, it's going to get hot enough that any moisture that did build up in there, it typically cooks off. So I don't ever really see rusting in headers unless you have a really, really inexpensive set. And then you might see it, but I typically with headers, if I don't buy them coated, I will usually have them ceramic coated. Typically, any good powder coating shop will have a ceramic coat type finish, not Cerakote, but ceramic coat, and it does help isolate it. But certainly, the wrap is the better way to do that. So, good tip, really, really good tip. One that I forgot to kind of pencil down to talk about, but absolutely, it's a really good one. Let's pop into the comments here real quick, yeah. Yeah, sorry about that, Robert. Yeah, Michigan, cool. I got a fondness in my heart for Michigan. I spent a year of my life up there, and it was pretty. I don't dislike the winter months, but I was also a little kid at the time, and I had hockey and I had snow, and I had a ton of friends and a great dog to play with. So it didn't really matter how cold it got. So I do have a fondness in my heart for the Michigan folks, no doubt about it. One other thing that I don't know that I've talked about or mentioned is, I think I've talked a little bit about it, but I don't remember how much. Um, the pressure in the fuel system does have some bearing on how much heat it'll take, and we did the what test was that? I guess it was the fuel filter test. Where I set up the fuel system and then we tested the filters to see what the pressure drop was if you were putting it after the regulator to show the drop, and the Aeromotive one clearly was the big winner. I am a big fan of Aeromotive stuff. I'm not sponsored by Aeromotive. I don't get anything for talking about it, but they are a Kansas City brand. They're in Lenexa, Kansas. I've been there 100 times. I lived in Kansas City for quite a few times. They're really, really good folks. And that owner, previous owner of Aeromotive, they recently sold and are owned by Pertronics, now the ignition company. They also own Doug's Headers and something else I can't remember. Industry stuff that you probably don't care about. But he was very adamant about making all of his stuff in the U.S. So I don't know if that really equates to the quality of it, but certainly I've never had Aeromotive stuff fail on me, and the times when I have, it's typically when I've done something wrong with it. And typically it's filters. If you can keep the filters good in it, you'll keep all the crap out of it. But running a pressure regulator, we've talked about that quite a number of times. You knew that was going to come out at some point, where keeping the right pressure to the carburetor is key, but also keeping that pressure in there does help. The higher the pressure, it does help control the heat a little bit better. Now, it is a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of that, but any little bit helps, I guess. The main thing with a regulator, though, is if you can run a bypass. Now, I think the bottom port is in, and then you've got option on either side, but this is a bypass style regulator. It happens to be for a fuel injection setup that I didn't use on the Chevelle, but we'll get down to that one of these days. But running a return style regulator is the easiest way to send fuel back to the tank. Now, yes, you've got to run another fuel line back to the tank, and then you've got to figure out a way to put a bung or something in the tank. I did a video on that as well, on how to add a fuel return line to a stock factory tank that never had one. Very, very inexpensive, very easy to install piece. But that way, keeping the fuel moving back to a cooler part of the vehicle, which typically the fuel tank if it's in the rear of the vehicle, which most of them are, I guess. I say that knowing that the GMC's got the fuel tank in the cab, but it's typically cooler in the cab than it certainly is underneath the truck. So, but yeah, keeping that fuel moving and getting it away from the heat source, which is the engine, and getting it back to the tank where it can mix with other fuel and be cooler. Certainly a much better situation for it. So, I mean, a lot of folks will run a deadhead style regulator, meaning it just regulates the fuel from the pump to the regulator to the carburetor. There is no return for it or bypass for it. But I love running regulators with a return line, and I do it on everything. I certainly do it on all my stuff, and certainly anytime anybody wants me to work on their stuff for them, I certainly always talk about that. And running a return style system, it's just it's always worked, and it's always helped control the heat. So again, that one's bigger, I think, than obviously the difference in the pressure and raising the pressure to kind of control the heat. But certainly running the fuel back to the tank is a key piece to keeping the fuel system cool. David's Garage. Can I run a bypass regulator on a deadhead setup? Yeah. Trying to think how that would work. If you got a deadhead style regulator, yes, there are filters that have a bypass in it. I'll have to think about that one because it's been a while since that one's one where I'm gonna have to have a sip of beer because the regulator's typically the best spot, or you could do it out of the carburetor. Makes it a little bit more complicated, but you could certainly run a split off the fuel line. Trying to think how that would work with the Needland seats, though. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, you could tee it at the carburetor at the inlet side, and whatever the carburetor gets, type of thing, and then whatever doesn't want to go in the carburetor, maybe the T would push it back. Yeah, I would try that because that one's, I mean, a couple of bucks. It's just another fitting and maybe a little bit of fuel line. But yeah, I mean, it's a thought. It's a good question. But yeah, obviously having the right regulators, the better solution. But I think that would probably work. It's not over complicated, but I think it would certainly work. So yeah, maybe try it at the carburetor and push it back that way. There are filters that have a bypass in them, but I don't know how much money they are. I've never bought one. I know they're out there, but I think those are more for OE, and I don't. I am sure that they are triggered at a certain pressure. That once pressure builds up, back pressure, that it'll kick it through the bypass and send it back to the tank. But I've never used one, so I honestly don't know. So good question. That made me drink a beer. Mr. Tool Junkie, I'm glad to see you back, brother. Good to see you. What are your thoughts on the Edelbrock 8724 carb spacer 2-inch divide wood? Again, I really love the wood laminate stuff because I think, and again, at seat of the pants, I might be able to test that. I think it would I don't know if it would change the EGTs that much to do that, but that might be an interesting test. But that type of divided one just depends on what kind of intake you have. Now, the 2701 Edelbrock that I put on the pickup truck is a divided intake manifold, but I still used an open center. I can't remember the part number on that wood laminate one. I should. I've used it, seems like 100 times. I've bought enough of them. But that one I used just a 1-inch one because I had it here. I didn't want to buy another one. But yeah, as long as it matches up with the intake, no problem. Again, it's the isolation that's the key. Obviously, you don't use an aluminum one because you're just going to continue to transfer the heat out of the manifold through an aluminum spacer into the carburetor. It's not the distance, it's the blocking ability of it. And the wood laminate one is does a really really good job. Again, just seat of the pants on that, but it's always felt like those engines have run cooler. Again, I can't give you any data on that. It's just a gut feeling, and maybe it's just because I think they're cooler. I don't know, but they certainly cost more money than the plastic stuff. But a plastic spacer works really well. It's a good question. Yeah, whatever the intake calls for, you're fine. And certainly the thicker the spacer, the better. So, good question. Um, all right. Let's see what else we want to talk about here. We talked about pumps too, to kind of go with the regulator. Now there are pumps that have a bypass in it as well. Um, this electric pump from Edelbrock, this is a mechanical one. I guess I'm not sponsored by Edelbrock either, so we'll get that out there as well. That's come up quite a bit because certainly I do talk about Edelbrock quite a bit, but I guess I'll make note of that right now. Do I know the folks at Edelbrock? Very, very well. Um, I'll leave it at that. Am I sponsored by them? Do I receive anything from them? Do they give me product? Do they give me money? Do they give me access to anything that I didn't have to pay for? Absolutely not. Not even close. I'm not sponsored by Aeromotive. I'm not sponsored by Mr. Gasket or whoever makes that thing. I'm literally the only sponsorship that this channel has right now is with Eastwood, and you've seen how many videos I've done on Eastwood. I've done two videos, one on powder coating several years ago, and I did one recently on the flaring tool. It's more of a relationship than a sponsorship. They don't pay me for that either. Again, it's more of like an affiliate type deal. But they did contact me, and I do like Eastwood product. I've used it for quite a few years. It's a higher end, cheaper version of a lot of the tools that are out there. So it's north of what I don't know how to say it. I'll just say it. It's better product than the Harbor Freight stuff or the Princess Auto for you Canadian folks or Northern Tool or any of those. So I do like it for that. It's a little bit higher quality. But yeah, I'll just get that out of the way because got asked that on Instagram this couple weeks ago, and I thought, it didn't really fit in a regular video, but it fits on a live stream because I could just say I was drinking and told you something I wasn't supposed to. But I have, other than the Eastwood deal, I have no sponsorship. Edelbrock does not sponsor me for anything. So, good parts are good parts. Yep. And you're right. I mean, really, it's what boils down to. I mean, I'm not in love with the Edelbrock carburetor. I'm not in love with the Holly carburetor. I'm not in love with fuel injection. I'm not. Well, I guess I kind of am. But the brands don't really matter. It's the situation that you're in. And sometimes the situation calls for a big CFM double pumper that mindlessly dumps a ton of fuel down the engine because you are in a situation where you need a lot of fuel, you need it right now, and you need to get it to the RPM that the engine's asking for. And there's situations where you need to just sip the fuel gently and cruise in it and have a little fun stoplight to stoplight. Two totally different situations. They get that all the time. What carburetor's better? You always talk about Edelbrock. Do you think Holly's junk? Absolutely not. It's a great carburetor. It hasn't done the things that it's done in the world and be junk. Same with the Edelbrock. I get tired of seeing that. Oh, Edelbrock's crap. No, it isn't. You don't know how to tune it, or you didn't use the right carburetor for the situation that you're asking it to do. It's all situational. So you got to keep that in mind. And it's one thing that I've talked to people quite a bit over the last 25 years of doing this is, you got to make the right decisions. It's like building an engine. if you're building a 460 Ford, tell me what the best camshaft is for a 460 Ford. Well, there is none. They're all really good. Depends on what you're going to use it for. There's not one part number or one grind or one spec of cam that is best for a 460 Ford. They're all good, but it's situational. It's the same goes with carburetors. So don't ever let anybody tell you that an Edelbrock's junk, that a Holley's junk, that a Quick Fuel's junk. I won't say Demon because those certainly had their problems back in the day, but anything that's on the market today that's not a Chinese knockoff, a Proform, professional products, any of those, I can't speak to those. I won't, because I won't tune them. I don't touch them. If you bring me a Holley, I will tune it for you. If you bring me an Edelbrock, I'll tune it. If you bring me a Quadrojet Thermoquad, I will tune it. The Chinese offshore stuff, I don't. They're too inconsistent, and that's the problem with it. Speaking of tuning, I found something a few minutes ago that I wanted to show you. You all have seen the calibration kit. This one happened to be for the 800, that carburetor right there. But it comes from Edelbrock. It's got, well, all the jets are out of it. But it's got rods and jets. We talked about this kit and how to set it up. So you color mark the jets, and that way you color mark it on here. It makes it easier to do, to find them. You color mark the rods because they are painfully small, the markings on this thing, and my eyesight's not as good as it was when I was 20, so it's hard to read on there. So we talked about color coding, all that, but that's literally all you get. And to tune that carburetor in probably 95% of the situations, everything you will need is in that tuning kit. If you remember, man, look, I came prepared with props today. But if you remember, when we talked about how to use that tuning chart, everything in that gray area right there in the middle, these black ones are what's included in the tuning kit for that carburetor. Now this one happens to be for a 500. 500's on the truck actually right now, so it won't match up with the numbers that are in here. But these points within it are all included. The combination of them are all included in the tuning kit. Great kit, love them. If you're going to tune, absolutely 100% buy one of these. Buy it right along with the carburetor. You're going to need it. However, because I do so much of this, I don't have all of them. But that's my tuning kit. I want to explain a little bit of that to you. This is just the jets. So in there, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, I have the part number, which is important because everything on the tuning chart, look at this, I even got both sides of it. Everything on the tuning chart is referenced by part number, but it's also referenced by size. And if you can quickly do a little bit of math, you can figure out a different calibration. Now, the rod one is on the other side of the garage. I forgot to drag it over here before I got started. But in the bottom of the rod one, same thing. I'll have the part number, and then on the bottom, I have written what the size is. So I know that it's an 086, and if I can't find a rod and jet combination that will work to tune past what I need it to, all I have to do is do some simple math with the sizes, because they give them on the metering rod what the dimension is when it is for the rod when it is submerged into the jet all the way, and then when the vacuum drops and the rod pulls up, it will give you the narrower diameter of the rod, because it's got two dimensions on there. And if you do a little bit of math, typically with the second one, I don't usually do it on the cruise side because cruise side is fairly easy to figure out, but there are some combinations of rod and jet that may not be included in your calibration kit, and having all of the rods and jets certainly helps out. So I keep a ton of this stuff because I do a lot of tuning on different carburetors for different people. Not just on my own. If I was doing it just on my own, quite honestly, I probably would just buy a calibration kit and call it good. But I also keep a different size squirters. some gaskets. I'm just going to do show and tell tonight. I should have just said this is a show and tell show. It's not a tech show. Here's another one that I use. I always keep a set of instructions. The 1477 instructions are pretty good to keep around because sometimes you will need to be able to reference a part, and it'll give you, if you can find it on here, it'll tell you what the number is, and then it'll tell you what the name is. So if you do have to call Edelbrock's customer service and you need a choke rod, you can't tell them I need a number 14, but if you tell them you need the choke cam connector rod for a 1406, they can find it pretty quickly. So I always keep a copy of the instructions, but I keep floats and caps, and we've talked about the idle mixture screws and how they get the little ridge on there. I always keep spare ones of those. Oops. And tons of gaskets, and I mean, this is just one of the boxes. I've got another one plus the metering rods, but that's the level of tuning that I do with these. Is when I go to tune somebody's carburetor, I will take all of the service repair stuff that I have in case there's a problem with, they've got a bad float or the accelerator pump's jacked up, whatever it is, the gaskets are bad. Usually sometimes it's just to get them on the road and get them running again. It's good to have a lot of pieces and all of the pieces of the puzzle. And I don't buy individual tuning kits unless they bought a calibration kit. Then I will use it on their carburetor. That way they can kind of keep it all together. But yeah, as long as I've got what the tuning chart is and what needs to go in there, then I'll carry all my own stuff with it. So anyway, I just saw those and I thought, what the hell? We've never talked about that. I've talked about doing a lot of tuning, but that's what I do with. I almost always don't do them with these, again, unless they bought one. I almost always bring along mine and do my own. But I follow that tuning chart. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of cool and just something that you all have never seen before, I guess. I've never talked about it on the channel, but the one with the rods in it is much bigger because there's 24 sets of rods. I think it's 24. So anyway, just thought that was cool. I thought you guys would maybe enjoy that. So tell me in the comments if that was the most boring thing you ever saw. Tool Junkie, I appreciate that, brother. I really do. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. This one's on you. Thank you. I do appreciate that. It's not rare, I guess, but I don't do live streams that often, and I don't have thousands of people on here. But I do appreciate that when anybody's willing to say thank you like that. And certainly it lets me know that more importantly, that you got something out of what we were talking about to help you out. And dude, that warms my heart like you couldn't believe. An old Army cavalryman like myself makes me feel good. So thank you. I appreciate that. And you better believe when I am in Kansas City tomorrow, I will have a Boulevard beer on you. So I appreciate that, brother. Thank you. All right. Let's see here. See if I missed any questions in here. I'm so happy that the internet is still working and I can see the chat. So let me take a second. Took electric skillet. Cliff, that's an interesting question. There's got to be a way to test that to see what the block is. The only issue that I have with this is because that's plastic. I don't know how well that would do on direct heat like that, but you're turning my wheels here now. So yeah, I'll think about that. That's a really good suggestion. I just have to figure out a way to make it work so I don't burn the house down or set my wife's or ruin any of my wife's cooking pans. I don't know why I'm lying. I do most of the cooking in this house. My wife doesn't watch these, so she'll never know that I said that. So I don't know why I'm whispering. Seems like half a kilometer away, and she's got the dogs with her, so she can't hear what I'm saying anyway. But that was kind of funny. But good suggestion, Cliff. Let me think about that. I'd like to test that. I'll figure out some way to do that. That's a really good idea. Is there a fuel pump available with a regulator built in? Yes. And use a 500 CFM turbo engine. 3 psi. Ken, really good questions. Is there fuel pumps with the regulator built in? Yes. I typically don't use those for no other reason other than that I typically like to have the regulator up close to the carburetor, and the only way to do that with the pump and the regulator, the combination together, is typically it has to be frame mounted or back further away from the carburetor, and then you get into the situation where we did with the fuel filter test, where you can put all the fuel filters prior to it, and then post pump, no matter how much fuel line you have, it doesn't really matter at that point. As long as the pressure is staying the same at the carburetor, it doesn't really matter. But I typically tend not to use those. I don't know that it would, I guess I'd have to look at the price to see, but it doesn't matter if you're going to use a mechanical, if you're going to use a frame mounted electric like this one is, or if you do it, I say it this way, I'm not trying to be mean or facetious or whatever, but if you do it the right way and put the pump in the tank, and I'm talking for carbureted stuff now, I'm not talking fuel injected, it's been my go-to for probably the last 10 years now, and any single time I can get somebody to put the pump in the tank, I know it's going to have a long service life. I'm never going to look at it again. They're going to be happy with it. It's going to always run consistently. It's not going to rob any horsepower or heat up on the side of the engine like a mechanical pump does. So I always try to do it in the tank. But as far as the pressure goes with that, 3 psi is probably a little low. And here's what I do with a Holly and with an Edelbrock. Typically the Holly, I can go, excuse me, the beer talking. I can go a little higher on the pressure, but I typically start both a Holly tune and an Edelbrock tune at the exact same pressure, 6 psi. I start there and then I tune down from there. I will adjust the pressure down. Once I've got the carburetor dialed in, if I'm not using an AFR and it's more seat of the pants type of, this is the way I think it needs to go. It needs to go 2 more on the primary, 2 more in the secondary, whatever it is on the Holly, however we tune the Edelbrock, doesn't really matter. And then once I think that I got that dialed in, then I'll typically dial the pressure back just a little bit. And the reason being is because you can continue to run 6 psi at them all day long, no problem. And if that's where it likes it and that's where it wants to run, no problem at all. Keep feeding it at 6 psi. If you want to, I don't know the best way to say this. It's not that you're saving the life of the parts because of needle and seat. Look at this. Look at how that worked out. The needle and seat, they're not really wearing parts other than the needle part. So if you're running 5 psi at this, it's going to wear the same as it did with 6 psi. But it seems like running a little bit lower pressure sometimes helps the dirt and the crap that sometimes will get in there, and it makes it a little less tendency to flood. And I think a lot of that's heat driven, depending on how well you isolate the heat and how well you regulate it. Seems like everything's kind of falling into place, like I had all this planned out. But it just seems like a little bit lower pressure helps it when you get into those situations where, it's not a 85 degree day. Now it's a 95 degree day or a 40 degree Celsius day. and the temperature's hot as blazes, and the engine's running warm anyway. Sometimes a little bit less pressure will keep more fuel from getting in there and boiling over and, ruining the day, spoiling it. So I typically tune back from there. 6 on both. Now I have a lot of folks on race application stuff, and it's been a while since I've tuned a race carburetor, but sometimes I'll start that at 7. If it's got the spring-loaded needle-in seats in the Edelbrock carburetor, and the better race ones for the Holly, then sometimes you can start at 7. But I always start with the high side of it and then tune back, because if I dial in that carburetor at 6, it's running really good. It's got good transition from the primary to the secondary. There's no bogs. There's no hesitation. We're good off the line. It pulls hard. And I say, okay, we're at 6. Let's try 5.5. And it runs the exact same. Perfect. Let's try it at 5. And it runs the exact same. Then maybe I'll drop down to 4 or 4.5. But typically I'll just run, that in that 1 pound range. And then when it starts to stumble and hesitate, you've gone too far. Dial it back up. And if it's 5 that it likes, then perfect. Run it at 5. But it's a carburetor. It's an analog piece. It doesn't have the intelligence to change itself based on the quality of fuel, the heat in the air, the crap that's in it. Did I say elevation? I think I did. I literally have not been drinking tonight. That is the first beer I've had, so I can't blame it on that. I guess I'll blame it on that I'm getting old. Elevation makes a big difference. All of those things change as you drive on a carburetor, and sometimes it means you have to get out and readjust everything. And that's why I love traveling or using an AFR gauge, because you can use an AFR to keep track of what's going on fuel wise. And if you're running a situation where you're kind of cruising at 40 miles per hour and you're like, well, it's kind of running a little funny. Oh, well, that's the reason why. I'm at 13.5 on my AFR, which means it's a little richer than typically you'd want to. Typically on a cruise, 14, I like it, but 13 is probably too rich on a cruise for either one of these. And you say, well, I wonder why that is. It could be, you need to dial back the pressure. It could mean that there's some crap in the needle and seat and you're pushing too much fuel, and it could be the carburetor's hot and it's percolating over fuel even when it's running. It'll push more fuel through the through the system if it's got nowhere to expand. So it's an analog piece. You're always gonna have to adjust it. So really good question, but 3 psi is probably a little too low. That took me like 20 minutes to say that. I guess I could have said that right up front. So I apologize for boring you if I did. But yeah, 3 psi is probably a little low. I never go that low on an Edelbrock. I certainly don't ever go that low on a Holly. It's just 4 is typically really the lowest I've gone in quite a while. Although I will tell you, on the GMC, I did start to tune it this week and started shooting video on how to tune a carburetor. I wanted to do it on the engine with some live video and show you step by step on how I do it, because it's not just, hey, let me, change some rods or jets. Let me adjust the idle mixture screws. Let me adjust the idle speed and make sure it's not into the transfer slots and we're good, yada, yada, yada. You also have to do timing at the exact same time. Timing and fuel go together. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a fuel injection engine, if you're talking about a Larry Larson 2,500 horsepower S10 drag week car. It doesn't matter if you're talking about my crappy old GMC truck or Piston Twisted's 88 Ram Charger. I don't remember. He's a Dodge guy. I think he's a Dodge guy. I just made an assumption. That's kind of cool. But it doesn't matter. They go together. So you have to tune fuel and you have to tune carburetor at the same time. That video is going to take me a while because there is a lot more to shoot than I thought there was going to be. So that one could be a couple weeks away, but that'll be a really good video, because what it will do is it'll take every other carburetor video that I have done to this date, whether it's fuel, whether it's the fuel filters and where they go in the system, whether it's how to read the tuning chart, whether it's how to properly set up a muscle car fuel system, whether it's run a return line, whether it's stuff like we're talking about now with taking care of heat soak, all of those things will come back into play. So if you've watched any or all of those other fuel carburetor related videos that I've done, this adjustment video will be kind of the capstone of it. So it should be a really good one. It's just going to take me forever to shoot it and forever to edit it. So you may see a couple videos before that one, but I'm having a heck of a lot of fun doing it. I just haven't had a lot of time. So, Hybrid Muscle Garage. Hope you're doing well, buddy. That guy builds some really, really cool tools. Now, he's a Camaro guy, so I don't hold that against him. Just knocking you, but he is a square body guy, so you gotta kind of like him for that. But if you haven't watched this channel, that guy's built some really cool functional type tools, for transmissions and, really cool stuff. Check out his channel. I won't knock your RC. I guess I'm not a, I've had mostly Chevrolets my entire life. My Chevelle I've had since I was a kid, really. It's my second car I ever owned right out of high school. But trust me, if you said, hey, here's a 1965 Barracuda, do you want it? You bet your butt I'm taking it. I will, yes, 1,000 times yes. I'm a 351 Windsor fan. I love that little Ford engine. It is just, I've seen some nasty horsepower made in those doggone things, and I can't dispute that, it's just a love of horsepower. I love any of that stuff. So, and I won't lie to you. I mean, I still even like some of the import stuff, even though some of those guys are kind of weird. I guess I like the cars a little bit more than I like the people. So I better stop there because I'll start talking funny about the Mopar guys, and I don't want to insult my good friend up there at Piston Twisted. Let's see here. Once your fuel pressure set, is there a wise to remove the fuel pressure gauge on the rail? Great tool junkie. I don't have a gauge out here, but yeah, in the fuel filter video that I shot, those are 2 liquid filled aeromotive gauges that I use in it. And again, I think it goes with the quality of the gauge. If you're using a really, really inexpensive Summit brand or Mr. Gasket or any of those other Chinese offshore, pressure gauges, then maybe it would be a good idea to remove it. But in all honesty, the liquid filled gauges under hood, I've never ever had an issue with it, and I've never felt like, is that really giving me 5.5 psi that I adjusted it to? It's been running for an hour. It's hot as blazes underneath here. I trust it, and I think it goes back to the quality of the product. So no, absolutely leave it on there. You should have no problem with it at all. And again, I keep the regulator up close to the carburetor, which most folks do. When you look at the fuel system, keeping the pressure regulator close to the carburetor, it doesn't mean that it's that in the proximity, but I certainly keep it very close to the carburetor under hood. I don't think I'm trying to remember if I shot video of the C10 because it's got a Holley regulator. I think those are made in South Korea now. Don't let anybody fool you. Most of Holley stuff is made offshore nowadays, but you didn't hear that here. I don't want to talk industry stuff, but most of their stuff is offshore these days, and that's due to not a bunch of car guys doing that. It's because they're owned by a private equity company that is trying to make it as financially healthy as possible. So, but I do have a Holley pressure regulator underneath there, and I run it with an aeromotive liquid-filled 0 to 15 pressure gauge, and I could literally drive that truck from here to Kansas City tomorrow and have no problem getting out of that truck after 8 hours of driving. Well, I couldn't do that, but after 4 hours of driving to get fuel and look at that pressure gauge and know that it is exactly what that pressure is. So it's a good question. I've been asked that before, if you remove the gauge to it, or if you have the gauge fitting in it, but you run a braided line up to like the cowl of the hood and put the pressure gauge on the outside to isolate the gauge from it. And I've never If you want to do that, cool, but I prefer to have the gauge right at the point of tuning, because it's easier when you're tuning the carburetor to adjust the pressure if you need to, up or down. And yeah, you should have no problem with that. I hope that answered your question. Yeah, and you're right. I guess I didn't read the rest of your question. Yeah, some of the non-liquid filled stuff will bounce a little bit, and I think maybe you asked about that before, if I was using a liquid filled gauge on another video or maybe a post or something I put up. But yeah, that's part of the reason why I run it. I like the liquid filled stuff, and yeah, it does stabilize it a little bit. So yeah, for sure. But yeah, running them under hood, if it's a good quality one. But yeah, an Amazon or a cheap one probably isn't the best. Um, I want to talk about filters really quick. If you've bought an Edelbrock, I'm gonna date myself a little bit here. 2015, maybe 2016. Edelbrock started including a fuel filter in all of their 1406 carburetors. They didn't do it in the 750s. They didn't do it in the Thunder Series carburetor with the adjustable secondaries. They didn't do it in the 500. It was only in the 1406 because it was their highest volume selling carburetor. They sell more of those than any other part number, primarily because you can go to any auto parts store typically and buy one. They probably have one on the shelf. They started including a fuel filter in every single kit, and it was just to control the warranty on these things, because most of the carburetors that they get back from warranty are not. It'll say that the customer will say it's flooding. The carburetor's junk. It's flooding. Well, you just put a carburetor on. You didn't change any of your filters that you had on there. All the lines that you were moving around jostled a bunch of crap in the system, and now it is full of garbage. Sure, I'm sure it's flooding. I'm sure it's flooding horribly. But they included a fuel filter. Now, even these cheap plastic filters, if you remember in the fuel filter video on the pressure drop, I think we saw half a pound of pressure drop when this was post regulator. If this is your fuel system, man, look at this. Pump, regulator, filter, carburetor, you lost about half a PSI. But I would still run this filter right here, this very inexpensive Cuss filtration. They've got a couple of different brands of these. I don't know KUSS. That's interesting, because I have a lot of four-letter words for my internet right now. Interesting. But anyway, I would run that filter all day long as a plastic, paper element filter. I don't remember. I'm trying to keep these other filters flying around. If y'all remember this crappy filter that we did in the fuel filter test, and I gotta apologize, I wounded my paw earlier this week. This thing knocked apart here. But if you remember, the beer out of there, I would run this filter all day long before I would run this nice billet anodized aluminum dash 8 fitting, and that's the filter. All of that for that. That is the surface area that you have to filter that thing. I still can't get over this. And I guess it's maybe I never paid attention to it, or I didn't care. That filter came out of the package. All it did was make sure it was tightened down. Maybe I just never took it apart, but those pancake style filters are out there. But if you look at the amount of surface area that you have to filter on that filter versus this pile, dude, there's no way I would run this thing ever, 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 ever. I wouldn't run it in my lawnmower. And I'm sure my lawnmower has a filter. I don't remember. But yeah, that's horrible. So when they say any filter is better than no filter, I don't know how well that applies to this thing. It's just, it's dumbfounded me. So I hope that shows up on the live stream. For whatever reason, my chat is lagging, so I apologize if I'm missing any comments. Okay, so we made fun of those trucks on the road, and they are cool. You know, that mid '80s, early '80s. They're classics now, so cool stuff. I dig those. I dig that truck. My grandfather had one, so I'm kind of partial to it. So here's to him. Well, that's really, I guess, most of what I wanted to talk about. Let me see what time. Yeah, right in an hour. That's kind of thought where we'd be because I knew I'd be babbling along about something. But look at that. Man, it's just, I mean, that filter doesn't look like it's that horrible. I mean, that's a pretty heavy, nice looking, and it's got that in it for a filter. That's it. There's literally nothing else in there. I don't know if you can see that, but that's it. So, yeah. I'm going to keep this just to remind myself that there is very poorly made stuff in the market. Even though that's not something that I need to remind myself on very often, but that thing's awful. Anyway, Mark Dennis, hello from Iowa. You know what? Iowa's one of those states where, again, I don't know if I'll date myself on this or not, but I have spent a lot of time over the years as a kid and as a young adult at Knoxville, watching those dirt cars run. Dude, that is one of the funnest racetracks and events that I've ever been to. And I'm a drag race guy essentially, but there is nothing funner than that Knoxville track, and Slipknot's from Iowa too. So what the heck? So anyway, that's my commentary on Iowa. So welcome aboard, Mark Dennis. Glad to have you. Let's see. I think that's pretty much all I had. Unless you guys got anything else you want to talk about, throw it in the trash talker there. And I almost used a four-letter word there because if you've ever watched Zip Ties and Bias Plies, the old way that guy's channel was, I mean, it was a four-letter word every other word, but it was entertaining, and he still is entertaining. But that channel's grown quite a bit. He's a pretty funny guy, but he's another colorful Canadian. But again, I would sit down with a beer with old Peg anytime. So same with Pissed and Twisted. I would sit down with Mark and I made fun of Woody last time Mark and I talked, so I won't now. But I would sit down and I'd buy those two a beer or three or four any day of the week. Good people. All right. Well, it looks like that is. You. We lose the. Huh. Yeah, we must have lost for a minute. So I think you missed me talking about Robert's Garage. So anyway, check his channel out. Absolutely do some cool content, and I'm sure you're gonna love the 68 C10 in his. So anyway, it doesn't surprise me. Again, my internet sucks. Again, there's not enough four-letter word in my vocabulary for Comcast, so I apologize if any work for Comcast, have family, friends, but I'm done with them. I think I'll switch to a different service. So, yeah, I guess that's it. I don't want to drag this on too long, and now that thing's dropping connection, I don't irritate anybody. So, if you got anything else, leave it in the comments, or I'll check the chat here in just a quick second. I really do appreciate y'all showing up for these. I do appreciate you asking the questions. It helps me to figure out what I need to cover a little bit more. But I hope that it helps somebody else that's watching these. So the questions that you ask are super, super critical to all of us learning. And I'm not here to tell you that I'm a subject matter expert on everything that I do. I have to be really good at quite a few things, but I learn every single day right along with you. I've got a very, very challenging job. I've got a very, very challenging projects that I work on. And if I live to be 500 years old, I won't be, I don't know it all. So we'll learn along together. I'm just helping share some stuff that I've learned over the years and hope that it helps somebody out. So you guys asking those questions help me to do that. So I do appreciate that. We'll check the live chat one more time. And I don't know because the laptop's dropping now, so I'm sure you guys are dropping in and out on the live stream. So anyway, I appreciate y'all coming by. I'm in Kansas City tomorrow. I'm going to LMC Truck on Friday morning to pick up some products for my GMC truck. Really looking forward to that. I haven't lived in Kansas City 10, 12 years, 13 years maybe. Yeah, something like that. And the Long Mow Company or LMC, I know those guys as well as you, but they certainly have stuff for truck, and I'm gonna pick up a few things order, and it gave me an excuse to go back there, drink Boulevard beer, and have the best barbecue in the country, and that's the barbecue. Sorry, I ended. Yeah, I live in Memphis next to that, and these people here look like they're gonna kill me. So I better end the live stream now before I insult anybody else. Um, well, I guess, like I said, I can't see the comment because my laptop died or it's not keeping up. So anyway, that's it. We'll catch you guys on the next. And like I said, we'll be doing the on-engine carburetor tuning very quickly just to try videos out of it. But I'll cover the carburetor, cover step how we that's and decide how to use that. Take tuning chart. Every video that I've done so far on carburetors, we're going all in, folks, to learn how to, or have the confidence to do their own. Um, yeah, but the live stream chat channel is dead. So I appreciate it again, Tool Junkie. Thank you, brother. I appreciate the little beer money there. I will make good use of that for sure. Certainly Robert's Garage. I'm glad you stopped by Hybrid Muscle Garage. Man, again, I appreciate you stopping by. Again, if you haven't seen those channels for sure, and absolutely, you get your butt over there and like and subscribe to the Piston Twisted his channel. He's a really good dude, and I've got to know him just a little bit over the last couple of months here, and hope one day that we can hook up and have a beer together and. Maybe one of these days when the COVID crap's over with, we'll do it at SEMA and I'll show you the industry and uh, show you some stuff behind the scenes. But anyway, I guess that's it for here. I'm gonna go ahead and kill the stream while my internet's all funky right now, and I get pretty much done and ready to go. If my internet will help me load the thing, so we'll catch you guys later. I appreciate it. You guys are the bomb. We'll see you.